Welcome back to Beneath the Grandstand, episode 11. We just want to say a quick shout out to the listeners and the audience. Thanks for tuning in. As this over the last two plus months has obviously been a new venture for Alex and I, and a wild time in our country, in America right now. And so we appreciate all those have tuned in. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe to us on your channel of choice. Leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback and get your thoughts on the show, and continue bringing in great guests and great content. So with that said, this week is a crazy week, for lack of a better phrase. There has been a lot going on in America that has caused a lot of pain for a lot of people. A lot of confusion, and a lot of people trying to figure out how to get through it. It's tough times. The murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis has really sparked a lot of a lot of pain. It's sparked controversy. It's sparked protest, and which also have sparked looting and other things. All of these things are happening right now, also in the backdrop of this coronavirus we've been dealing with for months. And so, Alex, I first want to say hello and hope you and your family are safe, and hear how things are going. I mean, you're in just across the river from Minneapolis, kind of where this all erupted over the past week and a half. How are things up there?
Things are significantly changed from a week ago. Every morning you would go out for a run, and it would smell like barbecue for the first couple of days, and that was because there was burning across the river, especially in South Minneapolis, where the incident actually took place. I'll tell you, last Wednesday is when things really got heated as far as protests and the looting and the violence. Thursday night, so we're across the river in St. Paul, is when it kind of spilled over into St. Paul. From our perspective, we never felt in danger, but there was a moment where it's hard when you work yourself up into the anxiety stage. For me personally, I started to follow things on Twitter really closely. You can see, what's trending in St. Paul. And I started to follow that, and it started to just quell this like insane anxiety in myself. And then I got baited into downloading the police scanner app, which I will tell you guys, if you think Twitter is addicting, then the police scanner app will just completely put you over the top. And it was self-inflicted anxiety, totally. There was a gas station. There is a gas station a block and a half away that we frequent a lot, and it got looted. And I saw that happening and being reported on Twitter, and I heard the reports on the police scanner. And we never felt in danger. But the thing that kind of sparked actual decision making on our end is that we knew that our 5-year-old would eventually feel our anxiety. And I just want to, if you're a parent, know that your kids feel your energy, and I know ours does. The second it changes in a room, and we didn't want that to be poured out onto him. And so it was my fault that I'd worked myself up into this kind of anxiety, not paranoia state, but heightened state. And we decided to get out for a couple of days. We went down to Danny's folks, who live in southern Minnesota near a town called Mankato, and just kind of removed ourselves from the situation. So it's strange because today, this morning, yesterday, you called me while I was on my run, and it's strange to feel like it didn't feel any different than a typical Minneapolis morning. Everyone was out running. The streets are closed down for runners, the skies, and it smelled clear and it felt clear. And it's strange to know that just happened. And it's almost sad, how quickly you can it's not like we forgot about it, but I went running a week after this murder happened, and I didn't feel it on the streets. It was almost completely devoid of my morning run. I know some of us run to get away from some of these anxieties, but I don't know if it almost felt unfair that this sort of violent moment and unhappiness was that I was somehow removed from it just because I was in a nice part of town and I was going for a morning run.
Right.
So yeah, and I think so today, kind of transitioning to the now. I actually watched the memorial service that was held here in Minneapolis today. I watched a live broadcast of it on New York Times, and it just made me feel a lot like even closer to the situation. I don't know anybody involved. Like, I don't know his family. I don't know anybody who was even remotely related to him. But it just felt I feel even closer now just sitting through that memorial service. And I just feel even more somber now. I've moved from total anxiety to just somber, and I honestly I'm starting to move towards anger, if I'm totally honest, and frustration. It was weird. I had a couple people reach out to me because I used to be in the National Guard, and I had a couple people like text me or say a comment along the lines of, "Hey, good thing you're not in the National Guard right now, right?" And that was strange to me because honestly, like in me, like I I, I would have loved to be in that moment because I would have actually been able to do something. And I think like a lot of anxiety and a lot of frustration comes from the fact that you don't know where to pour your emotions. And like that's how I felt in the moment. Like I was like, I would have loved to like actually been involved, but I didn't know my place in this conversation. And now that I'm on this other side of it, I think you and I are starting to find what might be our voice and what might be our place in this conversation. And I think that's why I'm so thankful for who we got on the pod this week. And I think this person will be a great ambassador, a great vessel for us to kind of bridge the gap.
Yeah. And you know, I want to preface this, what I'm about to say, with the pain and the struggle and the challenges that people are facing, especially the Black African American community out there, are unlike any challenge I've ever had to face in my life. And I say that to say this was a challenging week for us, right? And so I want to qualify our challenge as not as significant as the challenges out there that the country is dealing with, but it was a challenge because we are white men, right? And in some ways it felt that we were not qualified to speak on this. Like, who are we to talk about race and talk about the injustice that was seen last week and really has been seen more than just once? You know, George Floyd is really a catalyst for what's happened recently. But we had a young man in Georgia not too long ago murdered. These are just two of many instances where this has happened. And, you know, as Alex and I talked through the show this week, we questioned, are we the ones that really should be having this conversation? Are we qualified? Are people going to be upset that we address this? Like, what if we address it incorrectly, right? And that's like, that's part of the question is what is the right way? Is there a right way? And we questioned, should we not have a show this week? Should we maybe point people in a direction for this week to another podcast that may help bridge the gap and help bring some clarity? And it hit us that's the issue, right? Especially for white people out there. That's the issue. It's uncomfortable. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know how to approach this conversation. And it felt like if we did not do our show this week, we would just be part of the issue. And so I think we both recognize that. We quickly said, we need to have a show. We need to get some guests on that can help talk about this. And I was I think we had put together a list of folks that, we have great relationships with, that we really thought could be helpful in this conversation. And I was running the next morning and it hit me. I said, man, I have a friend. My friend's name is Frank Ross. He is the husband of a close friend and coworker of mine. And Frank is the vice president of player personnel for the Washington Wizards NBA team in DC. He's been working in the NBA for 17 years, and even he was a basketball player through college. He even loves running. He cycles a ton now. But he is also an African American man. And I think the biggest thing that really stood out is he was a police officer for 4.5 years. And trying to bring perspective on this situation around race and injustice, but also bring perspective around the police and what, as that is the organization and kind of the arm that's really set this whole thing off in the last week and a half. So we had that conversation, and we really felt like this was a conversation that needed to have. Frank is gracious with his time to join us today. And so we would love to introduce Frank Ross onto the show, our guest this week. Frank, welcome to the show. It's been a crazy week, I know, for a lot of folks out there. And first off, how are you and your family?
Oh, we're doing well. We're doing well. Thanks for asking.
Well, we appreciate you coming on and talking with us. As we talked about at the front end of the show, and you and I spoke yesterday. We really felt it was important to have a conversation around the events and everything that's happening, and help bridge the gap. And from our perspective is, we'd love to ask questions and help get questions asked that maybe people don't know how to ask, and hopefully shed some light on what's happening and how this really is affecting you and the Black and African American community around the country. So, I guess I'd first like to just understand, where were you when you heard the news about George Floyd, and when you saw the video, and what was your reaction?
I was here in the house, and so first, as I'm sitting there watching it, uh, my immediate thought is, okay, I know this guy's going to get off of him at some point, because he's telling me he can't breathe, and so so me being a former law enforcement officer, I'm sitting there watching it, and then I'm seeing that the other officers that are also on that scene, no one has any concern for George Floyd, and the fact that the man is fighting for his life and fighting for breath. So that even for me to see that, it was really disturbing that no one on that scene had any compassion for the man's well-being or his life.
And being an officer, I mean, is there, like, can you speak to what, how are officers trained? And I don't know if things have changed. I think you were an officer back in the 90s, but how have
Yeah,
things
yeah.
changed, or if they have, what was the training like? And was there anything that they were doing, at least initially, where you said, okay, yeah, that was something we were told or taught to do, or was it
hmm
completely foreign?
Yeah, that what they were doing was completely foreign, because as the more footage came out and I saw basically the whole arrest as it went down, the one thing that jumped out at me was that he wasn't he wasn't resisting arrest. And then even when they got him out of the car, he didn't really flail his arms and try to pull away. Once they handcuffed him and they took him to the sidewalk, and then they sat him down there. I mean, he wasn't combative. And so then when they got him up to put him in the vehicle, and I talked to one of my former partners that I work with in Arlington County PD, who was white, and I talked to him about the whole thing, and we went through it, and he said, even he watched it. He said, he may have gotten a little limp when they was getting ready to put him in the car, basically saying, "Hey, I don't want to go to jail," but there was no resisting. And I've my time on the department. He and I have had people we arrested, and people at that point they realize it's a reality. I'm going to jail. So as I said, he didn't tense. I didn't see him trying to resist, not really getting in the car. But then when they put him down on the ground, um, and I was trying to figure out, okay, I'm looking at that, and I've looked at it several times. I'm saying he's not resisting, so why all these guys on him and he's handcuffed on his chest? So at that point, my mindset, he's under control. And when you arrest somebody, no matter where you do that in any state, any city, in the United States, your main concern is once you have them in custody is now their well-being, because if you arrest somebody and they fall down and bust their head open and they end up losing their life, I mean, you're liable for that. So that was my whole thing in looking at that, how they had no concern for his well-being. So as I said before that, I didn't see him, there was no resisting. And then even going back to the whole, they responded for, he had a counterfeit $20 bill. And I mean, they didn't find a suitcase full of counterfeit $20 bills. So, I mean, as a street officer, I mean, you need to do some more investigating. And I actually had a call one time at, I believe it was at a Costco in Arlington County, and with that similar type of thing, and somebody had passed a counterfeit bill, but the person that gave it to him, I mean, they didn't have a wallet full of counterfeit bills, and it just happened in exchange. They gave someone some money and someone gave it back to them. So at that point, you take the report and you put that person's name in the report that had the counterfeit bill, and that's passed on to the detectives, and then they go from there. So I was just a little bit miffed that, okay, he had a counterfeit $20 bill, but was he printing $20 bills? I mean, that they found a suitcase of $20 bills in his vehicle. He had, $2,000 worth of counterfeit 20s in his wallet. So that I was still miffed behind all of that.
We're talking about George Floyd, and this isn't the only instance of this, right? And the significance of what just happened and the way people had to watch it was very difficult. But not too long ago, there was Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, and these are just two of many instances. Would love to kind of get your perspective on why this specific incident really has been such a catalyst for people to stand up and to demand change.
I think, Ryan, it's gotten to the point where we're seeing this, over and over, whether it's a month in between or a week in between, and people are just tired from that standpoint of seeing that. And so I think people realize if you don't speak up for it now and we start to make a change, what direction is this country gonna go? And so I think see if when you look at the protesting that's going on nationwide, if it was just because if you go back to the Mike Brown shooting in Missouri, that it didn't sound off throughout the whole country. I mean, people had empathy for what had happened, and but now we fast forward, and it's the same story, but the name has changed. So people are to the point now where it has to stop. And and being a former cop, not all cops are bad. I mean, by any stretch of the imagination. I just think that you also have to now start to look at police departments have to start to look at trying to weed out folks, even if from the academy or before they even get to the academy, that if you have a pre-existing mindset toward people of color or minorities too. Because what happens is if you have a certain mindset to where once you get that badge and gun, you have an authority, and you can run rampant with it.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk more get some more perspective on the police side that you've had. Before we do, one of the one of the aspects of your life now is that you work in the NBA, you work in a major professional sports league with players and folks that have a large platform to stand on and to speak. I'm curious how you guys are, as an organization and as a league, addressing this with players, and how is it addressed, and what is the expectation, if any, is there an expectation of the players on how they handle this?
First of all, Monumental Sports has made a statement, and as far as the players, I mean, today each player, they have their own platform, and so the NBA has always been very forward thinking and allowing players to address social issues in the manner that they see that need to be addressed, and they have a platform to do that. So that's one of the different things about athletes of today, that with social media, they can kind of formulate their own plan and execute it on their social media platform, and then a lot of times then you kind of get the groundswell that goes with that.
Frank, I have my question for you as a person who's part of the scouting department, and for an athlete who's a prospect, or an athlete who's coming out of college, or an athlete who's in the minor league ranks or in the international system, you might have your eye on. How closely do you monitor an upcoming athlete's social presence? And what would you say to an athlete who might fear taking a strong stance on the recent protests due to that having repercussions on their, for lack of a better term, draftability?
Mhm. I think you kind of have to we do monitor, or we do look at prospective draft choices, social media accounts, and because I mean it's so prevalent today. It's really part of society, and but as far as censoring, so to speak, or is in it ha, if there's a very specific message, and it's pertaining going on today, or what's happening now, I think it's hard to try to uh, I guess you don't condone um, that type of material, so to speak, on someone's social media page. I mean, and you have to, as long as it's nothing that's I'd say that's from the standpoint of being very violent, or something that's obscene, so to speak. So, but I mean, if you're doing it in the proper way, that your message needs to get out, then I don't see anything wrong with that. Because even my son, I mean, he's tweeting out stuff in social media. My oldest son, he's 27 years old, so. And I get my tech alerts from things that he's retweeting. So I understand, the mindset of the young athletes of today, because I have a young athlete of my own that, and I haven't had to censor anything that he's retweeted or during this time.
We're talking about this from the athlete's perspective, and I think we are in that kind of time zone of player empowerment. But I'm wondering, because the NBA is such a impactful organization, not just across the United States, but internationally now too. I think Adam Silver's leadership is looked at on a pedestal. I wonder what the league's response might be, as a more of a unified response. For instance, from the organizational side, we've seen in Minneapolis, the University of Minnesota and the Minneapolis School District have both completely cut ties with the Minneapolis Police Department. Would the NBA or the Wizards consider such a move?
You saying if that happened if something like that happened in DC? Because I mean,
Yeah.
because see, that's very specific to that area in terms of kind of cutting ties with that police department, because there's, and then you also have to understand if there's been um, history of repeated police brutality and abuse. So I mean, if you go and look at the officer's track record, I mean, he had three um, supposedly justified shootings and like 18 different complaints. I mean, if you look at it from that standpoint, there's definitely some type of systemic uh, of lack of policing, so to speak, and because if you look at it from the standpoint, could Alex, could you or Ryan have 18 different complaints at Flow Sports and still have a job? you know so to have someone to have and then you manage to shoot three people in the office as well, and you still doing your show. So I mean, that to me shows there was a lack of concern for the citizens of that city by not, because it's the for somebody to have one shooting in their police career, that's enough in itself, but to have three, that takes it to a whole nother level. So I think when you have that type of neglect by the powers that be within that city, within that police department, I think it warrants things of that nature to get them to take for people to start pulling back. So if that's what it would take, I don't think there are not many organizations, sports organizations, that if you have that type of unrest that's going on in your city, and that's where this whole thing it exploded. I think those measures needed to be taken at that.
Frank, you just used the term um, three quotations justified shootings.
Hmm.
Respectfully, what does that mean?
Well, what that means is that the suspect or the deceased suspect either had a weapon and the officer feared for his safety. There was imminent danger. And so, as a police officer, you're trained. A lot of times people will ask, well, how come they didn't shoot guy in the leg or shoot, as a police officer, when you go to the academy, you're trained to stop the threat. So with that being said about the justified, so the officer feared for his safety. There was imminent danger. The suspect made a furtive gesture, either uh, going for it, like he was going for a weapon, or he had a weapon.
Frank, on the, just looking back at the league again, a former NBA player, Steven Jackson, has been pretty vocal and supportive of the family of George Floyd. I'm just curious, what's the reception been around the league and the front offices, seeing this former player step up the way he has?
Well, I mean, Steven Jackson's part of the NBA fraternity, and so there's been a lot of support, and a lot of people sympathizing with him because he was friends with George Floyd, and so he has a good big voice on social media as well, and Barnes have their show All the Smoke, and they have a pretty good following with that. So the NBA community, they understand because that was a friend of his. So I mean that hit home with for him to be out front and speaking loudly about this, I think will help to get some, things changed so this doesn't happen to someone else.
It's crazy to see how powerful and I think we all know it, right? You mentioned how big of a platform players have. It's crazy to see how impactful it can be. And on the other hand, I mean, I think today is the day, or at least the day I saw the news about Drew Brees' comment that I think came out yesterday. And so, just how quickly and how large of a platform this can be to, and yeah, and with what just came out with Drew Brees and the response from the players in the NFL. I mean, do you have any thoughts around how that was handled and the response from the players? It seems like he's tried to come back and communicate his regret for what he said, but I'm curious to your take on how that was handled.
Well, I mean, because actually I heard his comments this morning again, and the thing about it was when I listened to it, what resonated with me was that when he talked about his um his father and his grandfather in terms of serving in the military. Well, my dad served in the army as well, but my dad never spoke about his time in the military, as a black man. And when I heard him say that, that was one of my initial thoughts. But then also, um, it's if Colin Kaepernick taking the knee has never been about the flag. It's just like, to me, you look at, he just used that point in the game to peacefully say, okay, we need to bring some attention to this issue that's going on in America. So um, to be that blind to at this point to make that statement, to me, is you really don't want to address the issue, and you still thinking that what he was kneeling for had to do with the flag, and it never had anything to do with the flag. It was just that point of the before the game started, that he wanted to bring some light to that. So, listening to Drew Brees say that, it threw me back also from the standpoint of, I mean, you're in the locker room with black guys, and you would think he would have a little more um, sympathy to the issue, and especially after what happened with George Floyd, because it almost, you would think he should have had an aha moment and to himself say, "Oh, this is what this was about. I need to readdress this and open my mind up more to this issue."
Frank, we're talking about athletes in the moment and their impact, but I think the identity of a city and the identity of a team can have a huge impact too. You're part of an organization who had a name change. I don't know, 2 decades ago now. That used to be the Washington Bullets,
Hmm.
and out of respect for the uh, heinous amount of gun violence that there was in the DC area, they changed their name to the Wizards. And I think we've seen teams and cities plant a flag and push the conversation forward.
Hmm.
What can the league and teams do appropriately? When NBA does start in October or whenever it's going to happen, what's going to be an appropriate presence and voice from the league and team's perspective to continue to foster an environment for players and fans to feel comfortable about speaking out about these injustices?
I think the one thing about the like, as I said earlier, the NBA is very supportive of the athletes in terms of being socially active. And I mean, you have the biggest stars in the league. LeBron James will one of the biggest stars in the league. LeBron James is very socially active. So I think one of the things or that can be done is to, not just to can you talk about things, but, have to change. Legislation has to change. We have to, it's legislation, education. And what I mean by the education part too, within the police departments, I remember growing up, and I grew up growing up and I was in elementary school in D.C. We had what we called we had a coloring book, and it was on the coloring book was called, it was officer friendly. We had the Metropolitan Police would come in and talk to kids, and back that was in the 70s, in early 70s, and that was community policing, and a lot of communities have gone away from community policing, which community policing where you had the police officer that would walk the streets and walk neighborhoods, and even in the city, and those police officers got to know people, and people got to know them in the neighborhood. So there was some you had a comfort level with the police department and the people in the neighborhood, but then also you had the kids in the schools that grew up and did not fear the police. So I think that's something that needs to get back to where you have the police officers, where community policing needs to get back to that point, because even when I was a police officer, I worked in the community-based unit, and I used to get out of the car because I dressed in street clothes, and I wore sneakers and jeans, and I would get out of the car and take off my badge and gun and go play basketball with the guys in the neighborhood, and it really broke down barriers. Even being a black man, and it was a predominantly black area that I was policing. Being a cop, there was a wall, but by getting out of the car and going up and playing basketball with him, and sometimes just stopping and getting out of the car and just sitting on the corner and talking with guys. And my partner, he was a white guy, and he would get out and do the same thing. So it helped to break down the barriers that are there, and so community policing is definitely something that needs to be talked about, and kind of get back to that, because when you just drive through a neighborhood in the car, especially in inner cities, people don't know you, they just see the car, and they see the car, and there's a barrier. You have the car, you have the badge, and you have the gun. So there's three different barriers there. So that's something that needs to be discussed, and how can policing get back to that? Because I mean, we have to have the police department. I mean, there's no way getting around that, and we're not going to abolish the police. So that definitely needs to be something that needs to be addressed. And so and then as far as I said, with the social media piece, or the players being active, the more because if this tragedy is not continually discussed and talked and dialogued, and try to get things to legislation to change, and then you get back to, okay, it's been 6 months and nobody's talked about it, and it goes away. So we can't let it go away. We gotta continue to push and continue to have these discussions like this, and dialogue.
You said education, Frank, and discussion. I think that is very important, right? And I think from my perspective as a white man, I feel like there's a lot that I don't know, right? And a lot that I don't understand, because I have never and will never live in the same shoes that you have or another black man has. Can you help maybe like shed some light on what the world of a black man is like, in terms of a day-to-day things that you have to think through and consider, that us as a
Mm-hmm.
non-colored man would might not even be thinking of?
Hmm. Um, uh, just like I was talking earlier about how when we moved here from Connecticut, the first thing I did changed my I got my license plate changed and my driver's license changed immediately. Now my wife, she didn't do it. I got both tags changed on the car, and then she didn't change her license over. And then she drove around for a year. You know, as a white woman, she drove around for a whole year without with a Connecticut license in Texas. Now me, I knew if I got pulled over that that's going to be a problem. So that's something I immediately knew that I needed to do when we got here because I can't do that. So that's something I had to process uh as soon as we got to Texas, and then there was one time, or just like if I go out to her car and say she has, and I turn her car on, I'm going to go up to the store and it's nighttime and her tail light is out on her car. I'm not taking that car because I'm not giving you probable cause to pull me over because I got a tail light that's out, because I don't know how that traffic stop could end up. Well, I won't say I don't know. I do know how it could end up. So just processing just things of that nature, and even from the standpoint, I wouldn't, even about if I just wanted to go for a run out at night, I gotta think about, okay, do I really want to run through this neighborhood at night? Probably not, not a good idea. I don't really feel I don't want to put my safety and my well-being at the mercy of someone that sees a black guy running through the neighborhood and thinking, well, he just ran out of somebody's garage and he stole something. So, and that's something that I have to process. So, and even from the standpoint of like with my oldest son, to have I don't know if you guys are familiar with the talk. And I had a friend of mine who's actually an agent. He was watching the movie, the series All American that's uh, on TV, and there's an episode in there where the two black kids, they both get they get pulled over by the police coming out of um, Crenshaw, and they're going back to Beverly Hills, and they get pulled over. Now, one of the black kids is a biracial kid, and the other kid grew up in Compton, and he's darker skinned. So the one that's driving is the kid that lives in Beverly Hills. To make a long story short, when they pulled him over, um, uh, the kid that lives in Beverly Hills, he's really agitated with the police and why they pulling him over. And then the other kid from Crenshaw is telling him, just do what they say, just do what they say. So the police basically end up harassing them and putting them down on the ground. They get home, they tell their parents. And so the one kid, Spencer James, was the kid that lived out of Crenshaw. He said to Jordan's father. Jordan's a biracial kid, and Spencer was living with them. He said to his father, who was actually their football coach, he asked him, who Tay Diggs plays that role, and he asked him, "How come you didn't have the talk with Jordan?" And so a friend of mine asked me. He said to me, he said, "My wife and I were watching this, and we were like, talk? Is that talk like the birds and the bees?" And I told him, I said, "No, that's for real." I said I had to have that talk with my son who's 27 right now, and I talked to him when he first got his before he got his license about what he needed to do if he got pulled over. And so, as a black man, that's for real. And so and even with my I have a younger son who's 8. My hope and prayer and dream is that by the time he's going to be driving in 8 years, that I don't have to have that talk with him because things will have changed.
Frank, I mean, it's to think about that, right? I mean, I think about when I was a kid and I got my license, and the kind of conversations I remember having were, don't do this, don't speed, don't do these things to get pulled over. it was about obeying the rules so you didn't get pulled over. It wasn't about what you do if and when you get pulled over. And
Yeah.
so as a parent, how do you explain that to your child? And is that the first time that you have to have that talk? And what is the reception that you've seen when you've had to have that talk? Are they confused? Do they understand?
Well, my oldest son, Jalen, who's 27. I mean, he looked at me and he listened to what I said, and I said, then you have to, and I, even when he was in college, I mean, I still had that discussion with him. Because he was driving from DC back to Connecticut, and then I told him, I said, hey man, you remember what to do if you get pulled over. So it's also, it's kind of like an ongoing thing. You make sure you remind him
Yeah.
to do. And it's like I said, it's not the fact that he wasn't going to be doing anything wrong as far as he's not carrying guns or drugs in the car, but just I know, because I know racial profiling goes on, and then his vehicle has tinted windows, so that in itself can lead to a traffic stop, because you could be driving through coming from DC going through New Jersey, and New Jersey tint laws are different from DC. Then that next thing you know, whoop, that gives the probable cause to pull you over now. And I always told them, I said, if you get pulled over, I said, and because if they ask you, you have any drugs or guns in the car, you mind if I search the car? I said, you tell them no, and you say, hey, you ask, what's your probable cause for pulling me over? And then, and if it's for speeding, if it's for a traffic violation, I said, they have no right to search the vehicle. You tell them, you say, hey, you stopped me for speeding. Here's my license registration, and so just so he understands that. And I didn't have that conversation with him just one time. I made him understand what probable cause is, so he knows, that okay, you don't have the right. And a lot of times with police officers, when they're profiling and making stopping people based off of who's in the vehicle, race, then they're counting on them not to know their rights, and to want to be able to search the vehicle, and have you on the side of the road, handcuff you for their safety, to do all that type of stuff. So like I said, it's just been drilled in him. You understand, if you can't remember probable cause, PC, what's your PC?
Mm-hmm.
Frank, I have a 5-year-old, and first off, like the talk, that's not the one I've ever thought about needing to have with him. But it is interesting to see, how they interpret the news, and they interpret kind of energies being exuded by the public and what they see. And even I've noticed over just like the last 2 weeks, instead of saying police officer, my son started saying cop, which I thought was really surprising for a 5-year-old. Like, I don't even know where he's heard the term cop, because there's a police vehicle, and like it used to be a celebration whenever we saw one drive down the street. That's how a young
Right.
5-year-old and a young white dad sees it. Oh, fun, a cop car! Isn't that great? But now I just wonder, like, the perceptions are starting to be flipped on the trust of police, and I wonder, how do we maintain the aspirational value of police officers as leaders of our community and vessels of safety for for young people? You mentioned it before. We need the police, but how do we elevate them again? We couldn't be any lower with their public perception now. How do we create them as these aspirational, members and ambassadors of safety for our communities?
Yeah, and that goes back to with that community policing because see, if you always looking at police officers from afar, or they only come around when something bad happens, it's tough to have a level of trust, and that's where the community policing and the police officers getting to know the kids in the community and get back to that, going back to the schools and talking to kids and as I said before, it's a being a police officer it's a noble profession, and as I said before, they're not all police officers. To cast a blanket on all of them, to say that they're bad, because as I said, I was a police officer before, so I know I work with some good people. And I work with people that definitely wouldn't have sat and watched and been complicit if something like that was going on within our department. So I just think it needs to, the community, the police needs to get back to engaging with the community in positive things, and definitely with the younger kids, because you got the pandemic going on now, so that's all that's on TV. What's going on now? So if they don't get some type of the gap has to be bridged, because as you said, Alex, that there's a distrust, and in order to gain that trust, there has to be dialogue with the police, and you have to allow these young kids to ask questions, to understand that police officers are humans too, and that once you get beyond that and see that behind that badge there in that uniform there's a real person, I think that changes everything, or help to change everything.
Frank, on the side of the police, from your experience, you said you worked with officers that were good police officers, and I'm curious, in the term bad cop, how, while you were an officer, how was there a percentage of cops that you would say, man, that's probably a bad cop? Or how should people be thinking about this? And like you said, not all cops are bad cops, but the shadow that's been cast with this whole thing, I think it's hard for people to understand how to think about it. And when you see an officer right now, how you should be thinking about it, and what those feelings are.
I think that on the question of determining how someone is a bad cop, one of the things that and I talked to my wife about this, because a police officer's job is to restore order, and sometimes restoring order is not you coming on the scene and I'll give you an example. There was a pool party that the police had been called to, and a police officer ended up slamming it was like a 15-year-old girl, and that happened here in Texas. And I sat there and watched that whole. I watched the whole thing as it kind of unfolded from my vantage point. And the one thing that I noticed, that when the police officer got on the scene, he didn't know order. He ended up creating hysteria. So, a police officer's job, as I said, coming on the scene, is to restore order. And that order could be just calming people down. And it doesn't mean that you have to now take out your pepper spray and start spraying people, because at the end of the day, sometimes you can control you can get a better response from people by what you say, how you say something out your mouth. And sometimes I think a lot of times police officers, if you have a badge and a gun, you feel that you have to be disrespectful in order to get people to do what you want them to do. And a lot of times it just takes just asking them the right way. And I can remember an example. I went to a game one night, and I was told to park in this particular parking lot that was behind the arena. And so I parked my car there. I was there early, and I get out of my car, and I'm walking up to the back of the arena where I need to go in. and I hear somebody say, "You better move that car." And I'm like, I look, and I mean, it was in the tone and the aggressiveness that they said it with. I'm looking, I'm still walking. It's a police officer, and then he kind of doubles down. He's animated and he's talking to me, and so I keep walking away from my car, and I get close to him, and I said, "You can't be talking to me." And he looks at me, and I said, "Look, I used to wear a badge and a gun." I said, "It takes all of that for you to tell me to move my car." I said, "You started at level 10." I said, "Where you going?" I said, "What, you gonna lock me up for not moving my car?" And he looked at me and he said, "Okay, you right. I apologize for that."
Hmm.
And so a lot of times, as I said, a police officer can come on the scene and can de-escalate the situation just by how you just address people. You, instead of me saying, "Hey man, get your butt over there," I can say, "Excuse me, sir, can you do me a favor? Can I get you to stand over here?" Which one is going to probably get a better response? So a lot of times police officers come on scenes, they escalate the situation by how they what they say and how what they ask people to, how they ask them to do something.
And it's an interesting perspective to say, like, hey, if you start at level 10, where do you go from there?
Yeah. And as I said, he looked at me and he had nowhere to go. So he had to realize, okay, first of all, I know what I'm talking about. Okay. Second of all, oh my goodness, I need I need to apologize to this guy. So I'm a lot of times I'm I'm thankful I had that 5 year experience because I know the rules, and I try to make sure, because even at 54 years old, guys, I get anxiety when the police get behind me, and I'm not doing anything wrong. It's just a matter of if you pull me over, then what are you pulling me over for? Now I've been pulled over before, and roll the windows down, hands on the steering wheel, and um I've had police officers, and they conduct themselves in a professional manner, and I'm talking about in small towns where I'm thinking there's no way I'm gonna get I'm gonna get a fair shake here, So and that's just, but that's the mindset, being a black man, that that because I know what goes on, I know what's gone on.
Mm-hmm.
Frank, I'd like to kind of piggyback on the starting at level 10 in perspective, and then also, coming at policing as, the first step should be de-escalation. Um, we had the mayor of Minneapolis on our podcast actually a couple weeks ago, because he's a former professional runner, and he was actually just on the New York Times daily podcast called The Daily. One thing he mentioned was the one of the most difficult things about this situation is that we have protests and we have totally valid anger, but to meet it, we're meeting it with the exact thing that they're angry about. And instead of quelling violence, that distrust, because of the distrust, it's actually amplifying it. From your perspective of being a former police officer, how difficult is it for some of these police officers on the street right now to be in that position of uh, they're trying to quell and create peace, but they're also a symbol of what sparked that hatred in the first place?
Yeah, that's tough because you know you the police officers that are out there on the front lines, they probably have, their emotions are probably up and down because you sympathize for what's happened. But then the same token, you have a job you have to do. But um you have to, and you kind of have to, you don't want to escalate the situation by if you don't have to engage, if the crowd, or if there's rioting and there's people that are in terms of if the rioting is if there's rioting going on and you have to move forward um, to de-escalate the rioting. So I think like what you're saying is it's like a yin and a yang, so to speak, and or a zig and a zag, and so you and I guess what you want to kind of you not have to engage unless there's imminent danger, so to speak, and you kind of got to let the people um, their emotional outbursts, but then decide how do we now move in to de-escalate the situation, or do we sit back and just kind of let them, because there's no harm to anybody, and even sometimes with the property, so to speak, is it worth us moving in now, or do we sit back and wait?
I think it's important for us to have empathy for both sides, and I think obviously being a police officer is not an easy job, and their days are full of anxiety. Um, from your perspective, the anxiety and edge that officers live on, how much of that is
Hmm.
because there's a large part of our population that is armed with semi-automatic weapons? What is your relationship with our current gun policies in the United States?
Well, if you are a law-abiding citizen, then owning a gun as a law-abiding citizen is not, to me, is not a problem. The problem uh, escalates there if you're not a law-abiding citizen and you have access to be able to buy guns, and if you're selling guns on the street. So law-abiding citizens, I understand that, but now some of these automatic weapons, I don't, I don't know what a normal citizen really, needs to have in terms of with automatic weapons. But I get a lot of people, gun collectors, and those people, for the most part, those are very conscious people that understand gun safety, and they have gun vaults or gun safes in their house. And but my thing is more with the folks out here that are obtaining weapons illegally, because if you in but then also if allowing people that are not mentally don't have the mental capacity to own a weapon, I think there's something that needs to be uh, done in that area as well. And the one thing about being a police officer, one of the probably one of the most dangerous departments in on the police department is on in uniform, and it's definitely a tough job, because as you just said, in terms of people owning guns, you can walk up on a car, and if someone illegally has a weapon, you don't know that. So that's one of the dangers with that, for folks are up to no good that can end up having in getting possession of firearms.
Frank, I want to go back real quick to ways in which we can reestablish police officers as stewards and ambassadors of the community. Um, as a black man, that does not seem like a common career path for most African Americans. So, I guess it's a two-part question. A is how do more black people become police officers? What is the incentive, and what is kind of the relationship bridge building that we need to get for young black men and women to see being a police officer as a viable profession? And B, I want to follow that up with a stat that came from, there's a community and called hashtag 8 can't wait. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they try to quantify police, maybe over policing and brutality statistics, and they found that as far as aggressive instances happening within a city police force, bringing on more Black officers does not affect the lessening of overly aggressive instances until that police force is at least 35% African or other or a minority population. So how do we get to 35% of police forces being of Black or other minority race, when, like I said, being a Black person and becoming a police officer is not a common career path?
It's funny you say that because growing up, that was not a profession I wanted to get into because I growing up through junior high and high school. I grew up in PG County. We moved over to PG County, Maryland, and that was something that we didn't want to be, because there was, kind of give you a real quick story. There was a young guy by the name of Terrence Johnson that actually ended up he and his brother got arrested for, I believe they were going into they were suspected of breaking in the wash the in the laundry room in the apartment complex. They took him down to the police station. Back at that time, this was in 70, I want to say like 76, 77, 1977. And Terrence and his brother, they took him down to the police station and they was interrogating them. And at that time, police officers could take their guns into the interrogating room. And so they was in there beating Terrence, and he ended up getting one of the officers' guns and shot and killed one of the police officers. And so he ended up going to jail. And so he was not that much older than I was at that time. And so when we would be in the neighborhood, when the police would come, we driving through the neighborhood, here comes, police are coming. We would hide behind cars because of that incident. So I grew up, during that time. And so there was definitely did not want to be a police officer. And I ended up, after I got finished playing, actually in Sioux Falls, I actually worked at the sheriff's department there for a brief bit. And I decided I wanted to be a police officer because I was looking in the Ebony magazine and I saw a advertisement for the DEA, and I figured I'd go do some local policing and then move on to federal, which it didn't, my career path changed. But as you said, I did not have that as a career path that I thought was viable for me, because first of all, I didn't want to be a police officer, and I was just like, there's no way. And then I looked at it from the standpoint, well, it's something I need to stay in shape. They wear a uniform, teamwork. That sounds good. So I said all that to say that you got to get examples for young kids to see that being a police officer, and if you're a person of color, first of all, now if you're on a department and there are people that are not handling situations like they should, then you can be a voice. So the more that they can see that as well, I think also will possibly help for young kids to see it's a good profession, and or a profession that they would like to be a part of. But um, it's hard to, if you don't see someone that looks like you and you view them as an example, then it's hard for you to want to aspire to be part of that profession. And as I said, when I went to school in the District of Columbia, they had that program, and it was officer friendly. So we looked at police officers in a totally different view at that point because of that program. So but like I have a couple of my friends that I went was on the police department with, and their sons are on the police department. My friends, his son is on Arlington County Police Department because he saw his dad as a police officer, and he saw it as a noble way to make a living. So, so you have those uh, kids that have an example of the parents. So a lot of times that happens, and then sometimes, you have the kids whose parents are police officers, and they want no parts of it because some of the things that their parents have gone through as police officers. So it's kind of having the right examples before for kids to see that it's a good profession, and you can see that you can have a black deputy chief, a black chief of a police department. So I think when kids can see that, it kind of opens their eyes up. Hey, I could be the chief of police one day.
Frank, last question I have for you, just around the police side of this thing is, they listen to a few things talk about just the protection of police and the challenges that sometimes are in place to clean up, a police force or cops that are part of the department that maybe are not the representatives that we should have. I mean, can you speak to that at all and help people understand maybe some of the challenges that are faced in those scenarios, and are there ways to do it?
That has to be, that has to come with the leadership piece. The leadership definitely has to address that and make a stand. That and even going through the hiring process, because if you're bringing in new recruits within that police department, to let them know that your core values as a police department. Because the police department I work for, Arlington County PD, they made a statement about the George Floyd incident, and what they said in their statement, that basically their core values didn't line up with that type of police work. So just off of that, in terms of, so even anybody, if you're on that department and you're not in line with that, you're going to be highlighted, because now the chief has made a statement, and so you better get in line. So it has to come from above, and has to be reiterated constantly, that this type of policing is not going to be tolerated, and you will be removed from this department if you're not in line with that. And so I think that's the most important thing, that you have to have the leadership in place, from the chief and then down to his lieutenants, from the lieutenant, from the chief, deputy chief, down to your lieutenants, down to your sergeants, down to your corporals, and it has to continue to be echoed that there's a proper way to police. And the main thing is that you need to treat people with respect. If somebody's going to jail, it's no reason to treat them, to be disrespectful and treat them as less human. They going to jail if they've done something wrong. And that was one of the things that I always kept in my mind, was always in my mindset. If this was me, how would I want somebody to treat me as the way I'm treating this person? So at the end of the day, those are the type of people that need to have a badge and a gun. Because as I said, at the end of the day, if somebody's going to jail and after you've cuffed them in, what's the point of at that point of treating them less than human, and and taking their life?
I want to switch gears for a minute and ask you about kind of a phrase that I feel most of us have probably heard. Hopefully people, and I hate to use the word hopefully, but I hope that people understand racism is still alive today, right? And that's an issue. There's that when you think about segregation and discrimination and things that happened years ago, that were really, there were almost laws in place that allowed those things to happen. the comment from people that, oh man, that was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the official ruling is on what a quote unquote long time is.
Long time ago. Right?
For me, I don't feel like I'm that old, but it doesn't, when I look at history of what happened here in the United States, a lot of this doesn't feel that long ago to me. But I'm curious from your perspective as a black man in America, when you hear that, like, what do you think, and what should people know about this history and the context of time in what we're dealing with today?
Well, I'm far as being removed of that was a long time ago. Well, both my mom is from Georgia, and my dad was from Mississippi, and lived through segregation, Jim Crow. So as far as being removed from it, I've heard stories from them about having to drink out of a black fountain and not being able to drink out of the white fountain and going to all black schools. So as far as being removed from it, my parents experienced that, and I have a friend of mine who sometimes rides with me, and he grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, and he played golf in college at Southern, uh, and he learned to play golf caddying on a golf course in Shreveport, Connecticut. But he couldn't play golf on that course. He learned to play golf at a course where a friend of his had made the course, and used the lawnmower and kind of cut it out. But he could not play golf on that golf course. Now he went to segregated schools, and my uh, uh, my son Jackson, who's 8, was learning about civil rights this past school year, and he was asking me some stuff about some of the things that were going on during the segregation and how segregated schools were. And I said to him, I said, "Hey, well, Mr. Ed's on his way over here. Why don't you ask him? He lived that." So here my 8-year old is learning about segregation and in all black schools, and and here and drink, people having to drink out of white black fountains, and not be, having to go through back doors. And here I have somebody that's 70 years old that actually lived that. So that's the thing in terms of, like, when you just like saying it's, you don't want to say, hey, well, I ain't, it's not that old. It's not like it's in the, you know like he came, he's been here from 1800s, so I mean, but he lived through segregation, and he's talked to me about some of the things, and some of the things that were embedded in his mindset that to this day he tries to, he has to flush out from, having to go to segregated schools, and wanting, in the mindset of thinking you're less than. So so when people say that, it's really out of ignorance, because they don't realize, like, I was born in 1965. Well, you still had the riots and stuff that went on in D.C. Now I didn't, I wasn't, as I said, my parents, lived through, they saw all that, knew what was going on. My sister, actually, who's older than me, she was old enough to actually know exactly what was going on at that time in D.C. So, so and it's like I said, it's just out of ignorance. A lot of times people say that because, and a lot of times they may not want to, and I think a lot of times out of ignorance, but also not want to have these type of discussions, because you have to learn to be, at this point you got to learn to, to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that will help to create more dialogue, and to help just by you guys asking questions, in terms of, like, hey, how does it feel, what's your mindset sometimes as a black man, that things that I have to think about, you know.
Yeah. And I think I just want to call this out because I think it's important. point that you made, and kind of the comparison with your son and your friend, kind of on two different ends of the age spectrum. One's learning history, and for the other person, that's life, right? I mean, he's alive
Right.
and lived through that. That's, I guess maybe he would say, yeah, that's a long time ago in my life, but that's his life, right? He's
That's his life.
living the life that he lived through those times.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think that especially younger folks my age and younger, that, when I hear that, I don't think that registers, because you didn't live, like, if you don't live through it, it's history for you.
Is right. Right.
And
Hmm.
you forget there's still people here, our grandparents, so
Hmm.
even some of our parents. I mean, when you look up Jim Crow law, just type a quick Google search and Wikipedia, that was enforced to 1965, the year you were born.
Right.
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 Um,
Right. Right.
so,
Exactly. But like I said, but my parents lived through that,
right.
so, but even still, but my parents both being from rural, both being from the deep South, and both leaving the South to come to Washington, D.C. to, for a better opportunity, better life. They never instilled any type of hatred in my mindset, or any of my brother or my sister. They never, that was never um, even discussed in the house, that, hey, you need to, you need to, what white people have done to black people, you need not trust them. You need not to trust them. You need not be friends with them. They basically raised us to, you judge people on the content of their character, and how people treat you is how they raised us.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. It's about the medium that you're being delivered. This history lesson sometimes, uh, almost because of like a technology perspective, you visualize it as being far removed from your life, because we've taken so many jumps. I think over the last few decades, that technology from just a few years ago feels so far removed. I mean, you could even, I mean, when we think about World War II, and the you can't even grasp the hatred that was at the root of that conflict. But in all actuality, it just happened. In the grand scheme of humanity and our country, like, we just World War II just happened. In 100 years, we're going to be reading timelines of history, and it'll be World War II, and then 2020 will be right after it. So I think it's interesting. It's all about of like a perspective and the vessel of history. Um, and I think, you know, I it's I want to transition to, you were mentioning segregation of schools, and I think we can all understand that segregation isn't extinct. It's just being diluted in a different vessel now. Some before this call, we were kind of chatting about cycling, and I know that's how you and Ryan know each other. Is you've gone on some rides together, and you mentioned that you worked in the NBA, and my comment was like, oh, like I heard Reggie Miller is into biking, and then you mentioned, oh, did you know Barry Bonds is really into biking? And just that conversation alone was like, hey, isn't it surprising that a black prominent athlete is into cycling? And I think it's just like, we have to acknowledge that, like, why is that surprising? Well, that's because it's a privilege to be in those sports. It's a privilege to be able to, be on the roads and have a really nice road bike. Just as we could equate it to, you know what? Being able to go for a 10-mile run in the morning out my door is a insane privilege that not a lot of people have. And I'm wondering, like, are we just not we can see Jim Crow laws, and we can see emancipation proclamations, but it's like, are we just not, is segregation just being diluted and we're not seeing it?
I think it still needs to be talked about, and I think, if the school system, there's like a small window they try to that they talk about that in, as opposed to or it's a smaller part of the curriculum, so to speak. And I mean, I think you know kids need to understand that, because that history, if you don't know your history, then history has a way of repeating itself, and without that being in the forefront, and understanding and why it happened, so that whole piece needs to be a little bit bigger and I was excited that my son was, he was learning that in school. But then I was even more, it actually was even for him to actually have to be able to talk to somebody that lived through something that he's, studying in school, I think was very valuable for him because some of the questions that he asked, the whys, that kids ask, which I thought was really good. And so that whole thing, but tapping in on your cycling piece, where it's one thing I thought about, even like riding this morning, how um, it's like there's a certain amount of there's a camaraderie amongst cyclists. Whether if I'm riding my bike and I ride past somebody that's white on the bike, there's a wave. Hey, there's a mutual respect. If I'm riding my bike and somebody that's white, if they're on the side of the road, first thing I'm gonna stop. Hey, you good? You need anything? Fine. That's happened to me. I was not far from my house and my chain can't something happened with my chain. It never happened before. And I'm sitting there on YouTube trying to Google what do I need to do. And these two cyclists come up, two white guys. Hey, you good? I said, man, I'm struggling with this. And he said, oh, wait a minute, I got it. 2 minutes later, I'm on my road. He said, hey, man, there you go. I said, hey, appreciate it. Y'all be safe. So if I kind of thought in my mind, if society looked at everybody the way cyclists looked at everybody, because as I said, there's a mutual respect when you see somebody with a bike, because they spent money, they've they spent money on the bike, they putting the time in out on the road, and so it just made me think about that. It's just like there's such a level of respect, and it doesn't matter what color somebody is. If you see somebody on the side of the road with their bike, you stop, and ask them if they okay.
I think that's a really interesting way to look at it and really relatable way to look at it. Um, I I want to ask one more a question, one more about really a kind of another statement, and it kind of made me think of it when you said that you were raised to judge people on their character, and I remember I remember when I was young and like just a kid, and thinking about black and white, and saying like the phrase, I don't see color, like that's just my friend, right?
Hmm.
That's a good person. And as you get older and going through what we're going through now, it feels like that statement is it, it's really like it's we don't, as white men and women, we need to see color, because if we need to see color to understand. And
Hmm.
it feels like, and so I want to get your perspective on this, and offer perspective for other white men and women out there that may say that and think they're saying that in it with good intention. But
Yeah.
how much do we need to see the color to understand what's happening today and what's been happening?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's kind of cliche-ish when people say that. But in terms of like you saying seeing color, is not saying that because you see color that you're racist. Because like you said, sometimes you have to see color in order to understand that there's actually a problem. Like, did they not just did they just walk past that table over there and not serve them because that's a group of young black males over there? So you have to see that. Did he just pull him over just because it's a group of black males in the car riding, or black teenagers? So you have to. I mean, we have eyes, so you do see it. So if you're seeing it to the point where it's a detriment, yes, you know, then we need not see color, So, but you're going to see it. But I just think it goes back to it, because I always, even through my traveling through basketball, the one thing I've learned gone through been in many different countries and broke bread with people from all walks of life and different races. And at the end of the day, when you sit down with people, I think that's the biggest thing with Ryan, that when you it's easy to work with people of color and say, hey, hey, yeah, I'm not racist, or I've got some people I work with that are black that I work with at my job. But in terms of when you invite people in your home and you sit down, and you break bread, and you have heart to heart discussions, then you form bonds, and you understand, maybe, how they grew up is totally different how you grew up, and you learn from them and they learn from you. I think that changes your whole perspective on people. But you sometimes, like I said, especially when you invite people in your home. I have a coworker. He lives in Treviso. And when I go on the road, when I go to Europe and scout, I've been to his house. I mean, he's like a brother. I've been to his house. I've broken bread, and to know his wife, his daughter. So, but just think, if he it wouldn't invite me into his home, we would just have a straight work relationship. I'm not saying you got to invite everybody. I'm just saying that people that you form a relationship with at work, they say, hey, let's go out and get something to eat. And you sit down, and when as I said, you break bread and you really learn more about people. And to that note about my parents, when my wife first met my mom, as I said, my mom is from she's from rural part of Georgia, and grew up under Jim Crow laws and segregation. Same with my dad. My mom didn't pull me to the side and say, "Hey, you, you can't date a white woman." Never said that to me. And same with my dad. My dad, before he passed, he told me that my wife was his favorite daughter-in-law. You know, so yeah.
For for people that are struggling with this, and I say people, I say for um, white men and women that feel like they want to help, they want to have the conversation, but it's uncomfortable. And this is what Alex and I talked about, is like, it gets uncomfortable, so there becomes non-action, right? And you end up not doing
Hmm.
anything. For people in that boat, they want to they want to help, they want to show support, they want to have a conversation to understand. What's your recommendation on how they can take a first step?
Um, I mean, if you have questions, the only way you can get your questions asked is, if you know someone of color that a black person that you can talk to about it. I mean, that's the only way you learn. You have to ask questions. And my wife and I, we have discussions all the time about race relations. So she's helped me to understand some stuff, and in terms of point of view, being a white woman, and then she'll hear my point of view from being a black man. So I think it's just and then that's where I'm saying, you gotta just kind of get outside your comfort zone and just say, hey, I have some questions I want to ask. I want to ask, if you work with somebody, or you have somebody that's friends. And that's why I said those friendships can sometimes just be really surface.
Mm-hmm.
But this can help to make the friendship go beyond just being surface, by having these dialogues. And then once you get some understanding on how it is to be black in America, and then you be like, wow, that's something I never even thought about. Just like, just with the tail light, that
Yeah.
that whole thing. So it's just a matter of getting out, within your circle, and then kind of getting outside your circle, and asking questions.
Last question I have is, kind of on the same lines of just how to approach this, but it really points back to the what you said about the conversations you've had to have with your son when he was growing up. Should it feels like, if to help educate, right? This is all about how do we educate one another. and understand the side as a white man or a white woman. Alex mentioned he has a 5-year-old. Should we be having conversations with our children? Just as it might be a different conversation than one you have to have with your children, but should we be having the conversations with our kids at some age to help them understand what's happening or what their friends might be experiencing, and how how to do that in a way that a young kid isn't like, oh, there's something weird happening for my friend, and should that be happening, and how can that happen if so?
Well, like I just speaking with on my kids, my son Jackson and my daughter Lily. Jackson is really inquisitive about what's going on right now, and I've kind of give him bits and pieces. Don't want to give him too much to overload him with. But one of the things when you ask that question, I think that probably the biggest thing that you can do is make sure you have your kids in get them in diverse environments, because I did that with my oldest son. I mean, my oldest son has been in very diverse environments. So I think that helps kids to understand at an early age that people are people, because a lot of hatred, most especially for kids, the hatred is instilled and is taught. Because I remember there was a not too long ago, was a young high school kid, girl in Georgia, and she had some racial stuff that she was saying about the black kids in her school, and it was posted. I don't know who posted it. And when I first thing when I saw it, and I said to my wife, I said to Lindsay, I said, where did she learn that? I was like, that right, because she didn't grow up on she didn't grow up in 1960 and under segregation, and understand, hey, you black folks need to stay over here and white folks over here. So this was her what she was doing or talking about was, it was taught. And so and that's the thing where, as I said, if you can and just in this and talk to your kids about basically people are people, and if you put them in diverse um environments, that definitely helps a great deal, because that's one of the things that I'm big on with my kids is want them to be in diverse environments, because that helps you to really, especially when you become friends with people of a different race, then you don't know any better. You just, hey, people are people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is a great piece of advice for people. Um, you have to make the effort, really, and uh, put put your kids in the environment that shows the diversity, and makes it
Hmm.
so it's not something foreign, as you grow up, and you can
Hmm.
start understanding all sides. So,
And
uh,
and and it, and one other thing I wanted to say, especially in the work environment, if you're in the work environment and there's someone that is speaking negatively about a person of color, I mean, it's this is the time not to sit back and, he's always saying stuff like that. It needs to be, hey, my man, it's not funny. You need to stop that. Okay. I'm not with that. You need to go ahead with that. Okay. You need to change your mindset and, call people out, at this
yeah,
point, because it needs to change.
yeah, I'm glad you said that. I was listening last night to our friends at Under Armour had two of the hosts of two of the run crews, one from Harlem, one from DC, and both led by black men. And Matt Green, who's at a DC district running collective, he said two things that I think were really important. One was, we need think, in terms of the question, what can people do? It's like, one, you need to take a clear stance on this, is one thing, and the other was really exactly what you just said. In
Hmm.
terms of, when you hear something being said, you need to stand up and call that out as wrong. And don't, it's uncomfortable, maybe it's uncomfortable to hear it or feel like you're gonna stand up and say something, but now's the time to
Yeah.
nip it in the bud, and not let that grow.
Yeah. There's no time to be in the middle of the road at this. We all need to be on the same side, driving the same way, in the same, to the same destination.
Yeah. Frank, we really appreciate it. This has been again a challenging week, and really a challenging couple of months in a lot of different ways. And so we appreciate you taking the time out of your evening and coming on and talking with us and sharing perspective and insight and really answering questions and helping others understand how they can look at this and take a step forward together.
All right. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Touched on a lot of things today on a tough topic, and man, I do appreciate Frank coming on and sharing. I mean, he's got a lot of different experiences, and just hearing him talk about his time as a police officer and how his view of the police is, and I think your question about how people even get into that and his story of how he got in, it was interesting to hear. But all in all, I mean, it was a conversation that I think, pointing to what we had talked about at the beginning of the show, it was didn't necessarily understand the best way to have this conversation. And I think Frank really helped give perspective on how to take a step forward for other people to again, start conversation, start communication.
Yeah, and well, one, I want to give him more props. It's like, hey, are you comfortable coming on a podcast and talking to two white guys? One of them you literally never met in your life, and we're going to broadcast this out to a community that's never met you. And so, like, bravery from his part as well, because he's also coming from a position of power as a representative of the NBA and a representative of formerly of the police force. So again, like, so gracious of his time and just like willingness to speak to two guys who are trying to openly admit that they don't have a voice in this game. And I think, you and I have been trying to find our role in this. And I think one of the things that I was, most worried about over the last few days, and we got into this a little bit at the end of the pod, but what is surface level conversation? And what is just lip service at this point? I mean, I wanted to be sensitive to, what I put out into the world over the last couple of days, because yeah, like we are relevant in the running network, but like, but do people want to hear from us? And like, again, like, I wanted to be sensitive to not be belittling to the conversation by just throwing something up on social media or, and I think I'm still working through that, obviously. And I also want to say, though, I was starting to feel a little bit of social pressure to post something. And my view was like, I wanted to contribute to the conversation. And not that, if you just post a black square, you're not contributing to the conversation. But I wanted to, I don't know, I wanted it to feel genuine. And I also, like, if there's a person in your life who you think is judging you because of what you didn't do on social media, if their only lens of you is from what you're posting on social media, you need to remove that person from your life, because those people put on unnecessary pressure and a lens that isn't fair for you. And I think we have to be conscious of people working through this in their own time and emotions, and let them display it how they want. And if you have something to say, put it out there. If you're not comfortable, don't. But if you are going to put something out there, make sure it's moving the conversation forward. You're contributing. And I think that's ultimately how we kind of even came to this guest and the content of this interview.
Yeah. One thing I'll say about what you just said, if you want to post something, do it. If you don't. I mean, I think right now, again, I referenced a comment that, that Matt Green out of DC said, and it was like, you need to have a clear stance on where this is. I think that's the first step. I think that hearing that made it very, very understandable. It's like, before you can do anything, you got to know where you are on this. And I I think once you're there, then it's the next step is, all right, what do I do? Is it saying something? Is it doing something? And again, I don't even know all the answers in a list of things that you actually can do to help, right? And I think the way I approached it was, I don't know, and I need to ask somebody. And I think Frank echoed that in what he said. He said, if you have questions, you can't get them answered unless you ask them. And I've just tried to be open with people that I respect. And Frank was one of those people. And I just said, listen, I don't know the best way to approach this. I know that I recognize there is injustice and there's an issue, and I want to show support. I just don't know how to do it. And I want to ask questions, and I don't necessarily know what questions to ask. And I think just being honest with people, and if you're not someone that can, go out, maybe you don't even have a social media, right? So you don't even have that outlet. But if you're uncomfortable with that or whatever it is, go to a Black man or woman that you are friends with and talk to them. And I've done it 3 times now. And and in every instance I said, I don't know exactly how I can help, but I want you to know I'm here. And if there's feedback that you can give to me, I want you to know I'm here to take it. And from that point, I think for you and I, it was like, all right, well, we have this platform. Let's use it to have that conversation. And at the very least, let people know it's okay to be uncomfortable, but figure out the way to take this step forward and having a conversation.
Right. And I think, and you even said it, you said, at least just make the effort. If you don't know where you stand on this, try, find a way, find an outlet. And I think, like, for me, just even recently, like, I stumbled upon the hashtag 8can'twait group. And I encourage, some of us who might not be able to, like, tangibly sink our teeth into what some of this police unrest, this police injustice and brutality looks like. We are most of us on this pod are analytical people. Go to 8can'twait, and you will see just how specifically they are very specific on steps we can take to move towards a safer police force. And they are holding police forces accountable for and actually, like, trying to create scorecards for police precincts on how they rank on community trust. And so, I don't know, that helped me a little bit. And that kind of felt like my vessel, a very, like, tangible thing that I can grasp onto. And so maybe that's your outlet. Maybe it's a book. Read a book. Just go out of your way to find a vessel to pour your unknowns into. And there's a lot of voices out there that might help you find the words, and might ground you a little bit in what a stance might be. We're going to keep continuing this conversation, and we touched on it just a little bit in this past convo, but I think the privilege involved in some sports, and I think that's, now that we've kind of had this overarching conversation about what's happening in our society, now we can narrow it a little bit more into specifically how it affects our sport and our community. And we're going to continue to do that. And we're going to push the conversation a little bit farther next week. And we want to continue to have these conversations and keep them honest and open. If you have opinions about some of the things we talked about this week, reach out to us directly. If you are frustrated with some of the things we brought up this week, let us know. Please reach out. We want to, again, keep the conversation moving, keep it honest, and keep it beneath the grandstand. Those are the conversations, the honest ones that you can trust and be comfortable with, that happen beneath grandstand. We want to thank you guys for joining us this week. Please please subscribe. If you appreciated this message, share it with your friends, and we'll see you next week.